Cool. I think we're live now. So thanks everybody for hanging out a couple minutes as we got this set up, and really excited for today's conversation. We're streaming this in a few different places. So if you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to use the commenting right on YouTube, and we'll get those questions. So if you have questions for anybody speaking today, I can get your questions answered. Or if you happen to be in the Tableland Discord, there's a channel there where you'll see people watching the stream, and you can ask there. We also have it on Twitter. If you ask questions on Twitter, that's awesome. We'll try to keep an eye on it. It's a little bit harder to see in here, but I'll do my best. So with that out of the way, good morning. Super excited about this panel. It's kind of an area near and dear to my heart, and I wanted to explore a little thesis about how this is unfolding in Web3 maybe differently than we've seen it before. So specifically, I've been working in technology for over 10 years, and I've been always really focused on this intersection of communities and technology. And I think there's something really special there, and there's always been something really special there. And I think that right now in Web3 that it's really exciting. Before working in technology, I actually worked in science, where I was really passionate about how to use technology to enable scientific communities to do bigger, greater things, and bringing innovations like data visualization so that communities could sort of cross the membrane of science and non-science backgrounds. And so I'm really excited to have somebody from kind of doing that kind of work with technology and Web3 and scientists represented here as well. So when I started thinking about bringing these people together, and Brian and on my team and I were brainstorming what kind of topics would be really interesting, I got really focused on this idea that that all the people on this panel, in some sense, are building technologies and innovating in order to bring communities together, in order to help align and mobilize and empower people in different communities to do bigger and greater things. And oftentimes, the things that those people in the community are doing are contributing and creating new technologies themselves. And so there's this really cool feedback loop of us creating technology that creates communities, that creates technology to empower more community. And I think that something that's really unique in Web3 is the speed at which we can close these feedback loops. And I think I'm seeing that happen at this community technology boundary in the feedback loop between the two. And I think these three people are working on things that help make that feedback loop as fast as we've ever seen it. And so this is everywhere. It's in Lens Protocol, Rebel, LabDAO, also in Snapshot, DeveloperDAO, on Cyber, just like the list goes on of these technologies that sort of sit at that membrane between hardcore technologies and the communities that use them and then get deeper into them. And it fits this pattern of the feedback loops. So I don't know why it is. Maybe I'm wrong about that thesis. Maybe I'm right. But I'm hoping that I can kind of explore the idea with these three people and we can get to the bottom of what's really going on. So I want to give each person here an opportunity to introduce themselves, and maybe I'll just move clockwise around the circle. So if you could each just share a little bit about your background and who you are and what you work on, starting with Aakaash.
Thanks, Andrew. Really happy to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Aakaash. I'm a core team member at LabDAO, where I lead a lot of the tech stuff that we're building out there. Prior to LabDAO and entering the Web3 world head on, I spent a lot of time in pharma and biotech, primarily focused on clinical R&D research and wearables and sensors. How do you track patient conditions throughout the course of a clinical trial utilizing wearables and sensors? So not quite Web3 decentralized, but the use of distributed technologies to better patient care. And I'm really excited about LabDAO just because I think there is, like you said, Andrew, so much potential for feedback loops in science. And I just think that Web3 can really accelerate the progress of science in general.
Maybe jumping right on to Mike.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to chat about community and technology with all of you. Um, I'm working on a project called Rebel, and we are a complete toolkit for Web3 creators. So we help anybody who makes, if you make podcasts or videos or any kind of traditional creator economy type content, we help with publishing and like decentralized content publishing and engaging a community. So we have really cool community stuff like contests and token gated forums and all kinds of things that can help connect members of your project and help facilitate communication. Um, I'm made like Web3, I think, really opens up the doors to innovation where when it comes to community and social and I think like media and just collaboration in general, like Web2 is kind of plateaued or stagnated. And I think that Web3 has really opened the door to all kinds of interesting new mechanics that we can sort of discover to really push things forward. So I'm excited to be working in this industry. I've been super stoked to work with Tableland, and I'm excited to hear what everybody else on this call has to say about all these things.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, over to you, Nader.
Hey, yes. I've been in the blockchain space for almost 2 years now. I've been in developer education in some form or fashion, probably for like 7 or 8 years though. So I've done everything from like creating and hosting meetups, being a part of helping create coding schools, doing actual one-on-one training with engineers around the world, writing books. Now I'm doing developer relations, which kind of encompasses all of that community and educational aspect, which is something I really enjoy doing. And the developer relations director at Aave and Lens Protocol.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. So yeah, so I think to kick this off and to really explore this thesis, I thought maybe I'd just kind of ask each of you some questions about the projects you're working on right now. And so maybe starting back with you, Nader, I was thinking about Lens, and it's a really interesting protocol, and I've dug into it a bit at some past hackathons, and I thought maybe the audience could get some orientation here if you could just share a little bit about what is Lens enabling people to do that they couldn't do before, and then I guess like just a follow-on question to that to maybe capture is. Do you think the protocol will give rise to new forms of community? Because I'm seeing some really interesting conversations about how people are using the protocol. And so maybe just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of stuff happening that it's enabled, which is like why I'm here. From the perspective of a developer, it actually really lowers the barrier to entry for application development. So you don't have to build out a backend. You don't have to build out a data model for your backend infrastructure. You don't have to build an API. You don't have to scale all this stuff. You literally have like kind of a built-in backend that you can plug into with data, and you can kind of focus on just building out a differentiating front-end experience. So I think this is already giving rise to just a lot of applications that are just being able to be built extremely easily. So therefore, you have kind of a lot of the ability to experiment. And from my experience at AWS, kind of providing a serverless infrastructure allowed for a lot of experimentation and allowed for engineering teams to kind of iterate and come up with new ideas and throw the bad ideas out because they didn't have to worry about building out a lot of these other core components. And I think it's kind of bringing that same idea to developers, but not only having the actual software infrastructure, but also having almost like an entire backend API that you can kind of just use and have teams building out and improving for you, and you can kind of iterate and try stuff out. So therefore, you're seeing a lot of like different experiences, a lot of easy to spin up communities and ideas. And a lot of these communities are kind of niche. So you don't need to have like 100 million users for one of these to be successful. You could probably have a few thousand or a few tens of thousands for it to be successful. So I think for the developer, the differentiating factor is that you have, first of all, this backend that's kind of already been built for you and improved over time. But you also have a built-in user base. So you don't have to bootstrap an entire user base. You literally have over 100,000 users built in when you launch your app, and in the future that will be millions. And that's the two main value propositions for developers. For creators and for users, one of the value propositions is that you have a portable social graph. So every single application that comes on board from now and forever in the future, you'll have users that are built in. So for right now, if you build out a following on Twitter, and then tomorrow a new social media app comes out like TikTok, you have to kind of start from scratch there. And then another thing will be hot like a year later. Instead of having to kind of bootstrap your audience across every single platform, you kind of automatically have that audience built in. You also have kind of new monetization built directly into the platform that a lot of people are being able to kind of use in new and interesting ways. So you have the ability to configure and if you're a developer, program different, I would say like on-chain things that have to do with actions or what people have done in the past in order to monetize. So interesting thing that's kind of happening is like at scale, you don't have to actually charge a lot for something. I think like in crypto and NFTs, you're kind of used to thinking of an NFT costing like $1,000 or $100 or $10,000 or something that's out of reach for 99% of the world. But on Lens, people are like putting collect fees of like 10 cents or 50 cents or $1. But because there are over 100,000 people on the protocol, they're often being able to kind of get significant collects. So even if it's like $50 or $100, if you're just posting like a tweet, that's still like a decent amount of money, right? And it's kind of cool to be able to have that built in. And this is kind of still in beta, closed beta. So I think like once we are out of closed beta and we have a lot more users, we'll see a lot more activity even than that. One good example of like someone being able to make an impact there is someone that tweeted out or posted on Lens that they were leaving their job to work on Lens full time, a new front end on top of Lens or a front end on top of Lens. And they set a $2 collect fee. They had 10,000 people collect that. So at scale, that was $20,000 for a post. And stuff like that is like really exciting, I think, to a lot of creators because you just can't really do that. You don't have any control over that. And there's a couple of other things, but I've already talked for a lot. So.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And you kind of foreshadowed a lot of things I hope we get time to hit on today, which are like, one, I think that you've done a great job building a lot of different communities and thinking through these technologies. And I've seen this pattern of you being much more attracted to technologies that are easy to use or obvious. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how that's changed over the last 2 years. Another thing you touched on is the power of tokens. And we think about what technology we're all building, and tokens is obviously one of the core technologies, and thinking about how to use that in community. So let's put some flags in those and hopefully come back to them. So for Aakaash, maybe could you explain a little bit about what LabDAO is doing specifically for science communities and what they can do with DAOs now that they couldn't do before? And maybe also just thinking through like, how are scientists responding to that? How are they responding to Web3 generally, and how are they starting to think about what you're doing with LabDAO?
So I'll start off with the latter half of that question. I think a lot of scientists are pretty skeptical of Web3. There's a significant onboarding challenge that we have to overcome, just because they see headlines here and there of like FTX or any number of like rug pulls, and so that has definitely been a little bit of a challenge. But I think to explain what we're trying to do at LabDAO, it helps to like frame it the current state of science. So if you're a scientist at a lab right now, typically you have to seek external funding to fund your scientific research. In the United States, this comes oftentimes with biomedical research from the NIH, National Institutes of Health. And this whole problem of receiving funding is quite significant because the large majority of scientific research funding goes to the Harvards, the MITs, these top tier institutions and by name. And so a lot of scientists don't have access to funding. One of the things that we're trying to do at LabDAO is to reintroduce the meritocracy that comes for scientific research. So Nader, you were talking about portable social graphs. I think that's something that we definitely want to incorporate into LabDAO. If you are a scientist and you have a compelling idea for research, you should be able to receive that funding regardless of like your current academic institution. So building those credentials on chain is very important to us. And one other thing that I'll say, this is its own rabbit hole, but I think it's worth mentioning right now, is if you think about the development and the advancing of science, it's its own like knowledge graph. If the COVID vaccines that were approved comes from early research that was done in the 90s for mRNA vaccines. The majority of the financial returns for those mRNA vaccines are from like Moderna or Pfizer. You know, they're the ones that are capitalizing on this. Whereas the scientists that actually did the early research, they're not getting too much of that money. And that's totally not fair. And I actually think it's kind of toxic to just clinical research in general. What we want to do at LabDAO is create a system where you can track, you can audit the growth and the advancing of scientific ideas. And so what you can do if this is all done on chain is you can do retroactive funding. So someone that ran an experiment that was a seedling for a product that ended up generating lots of money, you can actually send, you can reward them retroactively, which I think is super exciting and hopefully should create a more thriving scientific research landscape.
Yeah, really cool. So again, touching on sort of the power of these tokens and what's possible there. Sorry about, I don't know where that came from, but looks like Twitch people commenting things. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I definitely want to keep coming back to this. It sounds like there's some really cool overlap about what we can do with tokens moving across sort of the network within these communities, and there seems to be some really good overlap there. How about Rebel, Mike? What are the superpowers you saw were missing in communities that you thought new technologies could help solve, and what are you trying to do there?
I think like ownership is, and this is kind of goes back to what Aakaash was saying, is that like the idea that being a contributor at any point along the way can result in getting something back from upside in an outcome or just being part of the process is something that Web3 sort of unlocks that wasn't really possible before. And kind of like what Nader was saying, like it can be big or small. I mean, the idea that you could because we're tracking how money moves around in ways that don't involve costly credit card fees and bank transfers and things like that. It enables micropayments and the ability to track small transactions, but all the way up to larger scale things. People who contribute big or small to projects can have upside in outcomes. And so ownership in whether it's intellectual property or products and services as they scale, the idea that like, oh, I brought a friend into this community, and because of that, I get a little piece of economic ownership or reputational ownership in the thing are huge. So like that's a pretty big superpower thing I think is great. I also think that with information being on chain in this big global database, it allows for, you could call it credentialing or reputation. I think this is like a major deal. The idea that you can publicly display your contributions or things that you collect or curate. I mean, these are kind of like really abstract because it applies to scientific research and it applies to like media curation or participation. Like, I think that this touches a lot of different areas of human behavior, but broadly speaking, just the idea that people can have this portable global profile of things that they are participating in and contributing to, and that it unlocks the possibility of participation in upside, economic or otherwise, is something that just really hasn't been possible before, and that we're in the very early stages of discovering the full potential of. So those are like the major superpowers that I think about. I also love the idea of permissionless, like composability and permissionless innovation. I mean, it kind of goes back a little bit to some of the stuff Nader was saying. Like, one thing that's really been exciting about what's happening in the Lens ecosystem is just the total, like, there are so many really good front-end apps being developed, and people can do this with the confidence of knowing that the underlying data and structure of it all is going to remain, because it's in this sort of immutable blockchain that you can have full confidence nobody can really mess with or change or suddenly cut off because it no longer agrees with their business goals or purposes. People are free to innovate. And so, like, there are tons of really cool clients, some of which that are on a long waiting list that maybe you can bump me up on, Nader, but otherwise are like really cool interpretations of how people should be building communities or sharing information or whatever. And so that ability to innovate and compete without the permission of some central platform or authority means there's a lot more competition, and I think a lot more, it'll be like a much faster acceleration of innovation and new stuff. So those are all things that I'm like mega excited about, and are only possible because of the blockchain structure of it all.
Can I ask a quick open question here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm curious, like, what are the friction points for individuals or applications starting to put that initial information on chain? Let's say it's tied to a Lens protocol, because I think the idea of, this like universal identity is so powerful. How do communities tend to get started with that?
Either you want to give it a go?
Me?
Either of you, yeah.
So you were asking, like, how would a community get started with like one of these decentralized identities?
Yeah, and like, how would a community start like adding their information, like, having the buy-in? So the reason I'm asking this question right now in science, Google Scholar is really, really valuable. You can get your list of publications, the number of citations. So like, that's kind of the Web 2, I guess, solution. How do you get people to like transition from that Web 2 solution to like the Web 3 one?
Yeah, I think that it just comes down to providing like a 10x better product than like what existed before. I think most people don't care like if it's blockchain or if it's Web 3 or if it's like anything like that. I think that what we understand that is like the possibilities that we can kind of bring to the table through these primitives will offer a much better overall like user experience and value proposition. But I think like the maturity of some of the actual products that are built with some of these protocols and things are not quite there yet for some people to kind of actually start making that transition. So I think as we see these different solutions get better and better, that we'll see more and more people probably transitioning, and most of them won't transition because it's blockchain. They'll just transition because they think it's better to be able to kind of have that single source of truth and that portability and and that ownership and that immutability and that censorship resistance and all those things that they can kind of get. But it's hard to just say like, I just think that the more experimentation that we see, is obviously a good thing. But I think often what you also see is like competition. Like, people don't want to use the thing that someone else is already building or even help them build that. Instead, they want to build their own thing. And I don't know if that's like a good or a bad thing. It's hard to tell. I mean, experimentation is good, but at some point we have to kind of come to an agreement about like how we are going to do things and work together.
There's two thoughts I had in that. One is actually to that last point. I always felt like in the Web 2 of 10 years ago, things were set up really well for like thousands of experimentations where only the really best ones that got it right from, talent, insight, and a bit of luck to be the right solution succeeded. And Web 3 for the first few years struggled to be easy enough to allow those thousands of experiments. And now I feel like we're getting, actually, to your point on Lens earlier on, some of these primitives are getting good enough that we can experiment really fast and have a lot of failures. And I think that's good. The other thought I had, just to your question, is I feel like the motivations of people to move, exactly to what Nader is saying, I think they can be broken down into just a few things. It's like either you can earn them income, you can make them money, so they'll do things, or you can make their lives easier. So you save them time, or you give them an experience that makes it better for them, but really breaks down to just makes it easier. Something that they want to do that's easier to do now, or something they didn't know that they wanted to do, but when you show them, suddenly they want it, and it's easiest to do on your platform. And anything else beyond those two, maybe there's a third I'm missing, but there's very few motivations that people will adopt new technologies. And I think like privacy and encryption, there's very small niches for people that wanted those, and Web3 spent a lot of time trying to build those things. But really, we just need to build the 10x better, like Nader is saying, and get people to just and really expose what we do better and what values we can give users. And we'll get on that with tokens too.
That third thing could be that Elon Musk buys Google Scholar and causes people to want to build the Web3 alternative. I mean, that might be the third
version.
reason.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I think it points to, I think your question points to the opportunity that exists for builders right now in the Web3 space. Is that like the big challenge is sort of building the right user experiences and the right narratives that user experiences that are seamless and easy to use, and then the right narratives to communicate the value of being in this sort of like new version of the internet. We call it Web3 or crypto or whatever. And I think both of those probably have branding difficulties with just mainstream regular people. And I think some of the biggest challenges in our industry at the moment are really narrative based. And so I think the builders that are going to really cruise out in front of everybody else over the next couple of years are the ones who are going to be able to articulate why this stuff matters and have a great user experience waiting for. And the Elon thing is kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke, but it is, I think that like when events happen, like you have to be prepared for these sort of events that do occur that cause people to reconsider what's going on. Like there's always a moment of controversy, or some big company messes up, or there's this window opens where if you're in that place at the right time with the right narrative and product, you can really capitalize on that. I mean, Tumblr, tons of people, like through all of this drama with Twitter over the past month or however long it's been, Tumblr has seen a bunch of people signing up. Mastodon has tons of people signing up and florping in whatever it is they do there. And like there are those, you have to be opportunistic, I think. So it's like, to me, I think those are really the key ingredients to like what will be breakout successes in this sort of Web3 space, is like narrative, great user experience, and then being ready for opportunity when it comes knocking.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So I think I was curious maybe to just throw my thesis out to you all, and I'm really curious what your reactions are, if you think that this is right. And so I guess to sum it up, the thesis I was trying to present at the beginning was that technology is being built for Web3 communities such that Web3 communities can build technology, and that feedback loop is faster than we've seen it before. And I've heard you all touch in some of your comments already on reasons why that might be. Like it might be because of this sort of different revenue streams for building or creating things for niche communities. It might be this idea that we all own the technology collectively, whereas in Web 2, it's very hard to contribute to the technologies you're using as a community because that technology is sort of top down. and it's given to you, and then you do something else with it. And so there's no real strong feedback loop, whereas we have it. Maybe some other ideas, but just throwing it out there. What are all your reactions to that? You think that I'm onto something with that? Do you think you feel it or sense it too? And what might be the reasons for it that are interesting to you?
I think that's definitely the case. I mean, I think the idea that tokens provide a much simpler equity model for participation in any of these ecosystems, whether it's Ethereum and ETH or Polygon and Matic or Optimism and OP. I mean, there's like so many of these projects have native tokens, or even NFT projects or DAOs having however they sort of tokenize their communities. To me, it's like a radical innovation on what we typically have used corporations to represent, which is just like a collective of coordinated human activity. And because you can very easily become an equitable owner of these endeavors just by either purchasing tokens or earning them through contributions or however you come upon them, it really aligns people's incentives in a way that has historically been pretty difficult or costly to do with the traditional structures that we've had. So to me, I think that's one of the major breakout, like to your thesis, I think it's right on. And I think that a major engine that moves it forward is just that sort of shared ownership and benefit to contributing stuff. That's my sort of initial take to it.
How about you, Nader? I know you've been in the space for 2 years, which on one hand is old in this domain. On the other, it's pretty fresh. And I feel like you sort of pretty quickly came to the scene and already were founding DeveloperDAO. We're already part of a pretty big, and you think about what a DAO is, it's really a technology to bring communities together. And clearly that community is building technology. What do you think of this thesis? Do you think that prior in your previous domains, you were seeing these feedback loops moving as efficiently, or was it just different? And yeah.
No, it's definitely different. I've never seen any mechanism like ever that is this compelling for community building. Like, you often look for those 10x or better improvements, and when you see that, you should take notice or take note or whatever. And I think that that's exactly the case for sure for building out these types of communities and providing like incentive mechanisms, but also just I don't really know how to explain it, but it just seems like a bond between everyone that is part of that. That you can't really do in any other way. And yeah, it was just really wild to see how excited and how motivated and how close people became from being part of that community, that tokenized community. Even though we don't really like, we're completely like anti-speculation actually within the DAO. We don't even, it's not that we don't allow those types of discussions, but we completely are focused on building out skill sets and building software and improving software within the Web3 space. And I think like our thesis is that if people can come in and build out a high quality skill set, then the demand for their skill set will ride out any market, and they'll be able to make money using their skill set, and they don't have to worry about investing as their like way to pay their bills, and part of being in crypto is often like getting tokens as equity, or a lot of us are definitely still buying and selling on the side, but our main focus is like around I would say leveling up skill sets. And during this last 6 to 12 months bear market, we've seen so many people that have made career acceleration. Like they've made a lot more money than they've ever made. They've done way better than they've ever done. While the prices are going down, their like career is like going up because they've focused on learning something valuable, and they're in demand, period. And that's kind of like what I really like about the community. And but all the people that built the community like received a big airdrop. Everyone that contributed received tokens, but most people aren't like selling these tokens. They're actually giving them away, because like in order to bring more people in the community, you have to have ownership of some form of tokens to be like a contributor. we do a lot of public goods, but like to be part of the decision-making process, you have to have tokens. So most everyone just gives their tokens away, you know, like, because that's our way of recruiting new people and getting them in. But just having that mechanism there is like completely changed, I think, the way I look at how you might build communities. It's definitely a huge incentive mechanism, and it was like a really simple way to bootstrap that community early on.
Yeah, we got really excited about it before you had the code token. We were doing giveaways of your NFT to early developers just to try to get them a home.
Yes,
with, like,
I
cool
remember
other
that. That was
builders and
awesome.
things. So yeah, so exciting. So yeah, we keep going back to the token as one of the core innovations. And what you just said, I was reading a thread, a Twitter thread from Snowfro, founder of ArtBlocks, the other day. Just he was commenting on the OpenSea policies, but one of his comments embedded in there was just sort of making a comment about people that play poker with the art that's being created from ArtBlocks actually don't do service to the community. And I think a lot of us feel that way, that like we're using tokens for something more utilitarian and more for organizing and more for membership and things like that. When people come along and play poker with them, it actually creates this like parallel incentive system, which detracts totally from the mission and the goals. And I think it's a really tricky thing to start balancing because that is such a core technology. And so maybe let's talk about tokens a bit. Maybe Aakaash, I'd really love to hear how you're thinking about using tokens in science DAOs, especially as you need to navigate that perception challenges of scientists adopting Web3 technologies. You throw tokens into the mix. How are you thinking about communicating that around gating or incentives, governance rewards, and not bringing the poker into it? And yeah, just general thoughts there. How are you bringing that to science?
Yeah, definitely. So one note on like the poker with ArtBlocks NFTs. I've been really fascinated to watch Gitcoin and like their quadratic funding experiments and quadratic voting. I think generally speaking, if we can limit the impact that whales have, that should be a good thing. So I'm just really I'm fascinated to see this area of exploration continue in a number of different projects. Something that we're looking heavily into as of recently is the concept of hypercerts that like Protocol Labs is working on. So the idea that you can fund science, like crowdfunding basically through Web3, is really interesting. But then the ability to sort of reward based off of like proportional contribution, I think is very interesting. And if we tie these certificates, I think they're ERC 1155s. If we tie that to on-chain identity, all of a sudden you do have something like reputation really being developed within the decentralized science community. Maybe there's someone that has a really good eye for, protein synthesis experiments, and there's someone that you should keep watch on. Like, what are they really interested in? I also think on the token side as well, we're focusing heavily on decentralized compute, and so being able to gate people's access to decentralized compute tooling is super important to us. Andrew, I know we're chatting with you a little bit about that with Tableland and some integrations there. But making sure the right people are accessing the right tools is very important. As I think, as everyone knows, with science, there's tremendous potential for progress, but there's also tremendous potential for abuse. So not keeping the door like blasted completely open and making sure the right people have access to the right tools is so important. And I think token gating, Web3 token gating, is the perfect way to do that.
Yeah. And actually, that's one of the core pieces of Rebel, Mike, right? So like really thinking about how to give creators better give creators access to tokens specifically for gating, specifically for like saying, okay, you're part of my community, you're going to get access to new information, new ideas. How do you think creators could be using the next wave of tokens as technology, like not as, investment instruments? Like, what are you thinking comes next?
Yeah, so something that we're really invested in is the idea of reputation tokens. So the way that they work through Rebel are they're basically soulbound tokens. They're soulbound ERC20s. So the idea is that on the back end, we have this big list of actions that people can take. Like I've posted a piece of content, or people have interacted with my content or comments, like they've reacted positively to something I've put into the system, or I've referred a friend using my affiliate link, or I mean, there's like a million of these things that like you can that are all actions that members can take. And then for each of these actions, you can assign how much reputation they should earn for that thing. And every community can launch a reputation token that they can call it whatever they want to call it. And end users, members of communities, can't transfer them. So they can't sell them. They can't create liquidity pools or move them out of the wallet. So it takes any ability for them to be speculative or to be like securities or anything like that out of the equation. And it essentially just becomes a value that you can accumulate. And this is super duper powerful because you can, not only is that useful within the bounds of any kind of any community, but it's public and anybody can use that. So you could say like, well, yes, this person is a member of DeveloperDAO and has accumulated all this reputation there, and that can give you access to science compute because you have accumulated all of this reputation within another known community. And so that sort of like cross-border element of and this all goes back to sort of like on-chain credentialing or reputation. I think that's going to be a major wave of like where we go next with a lot of blockchain community stuff. And I think it's also really powerful too when you start to look at like retroactive rewarding, if you want to call it retroactive public goods funding, which is like a hot topic in some circles, but retroactive funding in general, divvying up profit or revenues or whatever based on people's proportional reputation that they've earned, I think is going to be something that we see happen like a lot across probably a lot of different capacities. So in the context of creators, I think you'll see stuff like early supporters getting a lot of reputation. If you get all your friends to subscribe to a podcast or to support an artist or whatever it might be, like it's a benefit for everybody for you to have contributed that. And so like that'll be a reputation earner. I mean, there are just all these ways that people will be able to get recognized for what they're giving back to their communities or projects. And so I think that is like mega exciting and a huge unlock for tokens in general, and does kind of help to solve that problem of like pricing, like just like all the sort of toxicity that comes with speculation and people wanting to be in projects just because they think it's going to moon or pump and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I don't know if you all saw there's Constitution DAO 2 now.
Yeah. I was just mentioning that when it comes to the science stuff, like I would love to see like science getting funded versus another attempt to buy a constitution.
Yeah, but I remember when the first one launched, I was like kind of digging into it to figure out what was interesting there. And the one thing that that popped out to me right away was that they used Juicebox DAO, which is just form-based DAO generation. Nader, I don't know how you built or how the team built DeveloperDAO, and if you used a summoner or if you wrote a lot of it from scratch. But I suspect that those things are just getting so much easier. So back to that point you made earlier on, and I think that we've just really crossed some important boundaries in the last couple of years, in the last year maybe, where like now if you wanted to build a new technology, you want to build a new community around it, there are a lot of really great building blocks to do it, whether that's Lens or applications built on top of Lens, Rebel, or if you're a science community, you can be using something like LabDAO to actually spin up your own projects and leverage all the power of a DAO. what's all your take on that? Is this getting easy? Like how easy is it now? And like what comes next? What are the missing pieces?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely getting easier, that's for sure, and we should continue focusing on making it like a lot easier in general. And I think it depends on like what's the point of making it easier? Do we want to make it easier so we can continue ourselves like doing all the stuff within our kind of bubble, or do we want to open this up to the rest of the world? And I think that we often don't realize the barrier to entry for the average person to do any of this stuff because we're kind of like crypto native people, and a lot of us are technologists, and a lot of us are kind of you know, excited about this stuff, so we're willing to kind of grind through some of the challenges that kind of come around to getting to know how to use this stuff. But I would kind of like say in the real world, and what you end up seeing for large applications that scale to, you know, the tens or even hundreds of millions of people, the friction points that we deal with will never allow that type of mass adoption as we see it today. You know, a lot of the work I often mention at AWS that we would see, like we would have customers that would spend millions of dollars in weeks or months of time just to shave off a couple of hundred milliseconds of latency for a service that makes their app work, because they were losing so many people and so much money. But we require someone to understand a wallet and wallet seed phrases and wallet private keys and wallet security. We expect them to go find the proper token, understand how to integrate it within the proper network, and then we expect them to also pay for transactions. And I think that all of that is just unrealistic, you know, for 99% of the people in the world. So we need to build for like those other 99%. And I think a lot of people have realized that. Really, most of the projects that I'm excited about are working on abstracting away a lot of that stuff. And I think that 2023 is the year of UX improvements and scalability. And I think like by the end of next year, we're going to see a lot better products that are, you know, improving the number of, or not improving, increasing the number of like average people that can come in and start using this stuff without having to do like a crash course on blockchain stuff.
I 100% agree with that. I actually just shared an internal blog post saying that in 2023, a lot of the infrastructure protocols and data protocols we're seeing are going to start looking a lot more like SaaS, because SaaS got so many things right about the user experience. And now we've kind of crossed the hump of, can we get these things to work? Now we need to make them work for everybody. And so I think like the Graph is a great example. The Graph Studio, Live Peer Studio, those are great examples of projects that are dabbling in that direction and making this really easy to use. What about the other two? Do you guys have thoughts on this ease of use and big challenges ahead?
So a demo that blew my mind that I saw recently was on cartridge.gg. It's my developer I know named Terrence and at least another couple of people are working on this, and it's deployed to StarkNet, but through some crazy magic and account abstraction, they have reduced the web sign-in process and wallet provisioning and everything to just utilizing passkeys. So like passkeys are this new authentication form that are making their way through Chrome. I think they're supported natively on Mac OS and iOS and stuff. And all it is just like you do a face scan and it does an authentication, and it on device and in a very user-friendly way, it generates a private key and public key and uses just crypto authentication in order to that cryptographic authentication for just saving website logins. And the end user experience winds up being that you just do a face scan and it does all of that complex stuff like behind the scenes for a regular person, so that you are authenticating using your biometrics. And that, and the demo that they put together was like minting an NFT on StarkNet. And all it required was that you choose a username and you hit go or whatever, and you create a passkey by doing a Apple face scan, like a device face scan, or face ID scan, I suppose the word I'm looking for. And and that's it. And I think that they also, like, the fees were also transparent. Like they were able to do, you know, a feeless transaction or whatever. And it was the first time that I did like a relatively complex Web3 sort of workflow by just tapping a button, doing a Face ID authentication, and then it's like, okay, done, you're all set. So I think that, like, on the ground, like that passkey capability, and then sort of like account abstraction and funding transactions in a sort of abstract way, all these things are like right on the cusp of being available broadly, and that's going to be just a major unlock. Suddenly using Web3 stuff is going to feel very like, it's going to be like the best of both worlds, really, because you're not going to be logging in with a password or an email address or going, okay, like we sent you an email code, go into your email and get your code or whatever. You're just going to Face ID into like a lot of these services and apps, and all of that complexity is going to be abstracted away. I also think that Starbucks, I think like today, I saw some tweets about how they've released their Polygon-based loyalty app program where you collect tokens and do all this complete quests and do all of these things. So I haven't had a chance to use the app. I don't know if it's broadly available or just in beta yet, but I do think that, like, by the end of this year, I agree with Nader, like this stuff is going to be like a lot more mainstream than it has been. And it's going to be really funny to think back to the times when we like were logging in with MetaMask and occasionally losing all of your assets and like, and all the complexity involved and all the hoops we used to jump through just to like participate in this ecosystem. So it's a really good time to be building, because I think it's, you know, we're going to probably hit the afterburners on adoption pretty soon through all of these deployments.
Yeah, so just to kind of echo like what both of you have said, I think so at LabDAO, we're not quite at the scanning faces stage of our development cycles quite yet, but we've been recently looking, messing around with the Taurus wallet as an alternative to MetaMask. It is still like one of those things where you sign in with like a Web2 login credential, but by doing that, we can basically abstract the Web3 like which should be the backend functionality to the end user. And I think just by providing this sort of login process that feels familiar to people, not to say we're trying to trick them, but like you should sort of like hide a lot of these details that don't need to be placed front and center to the end user. If we can do that, like we'll be like well on our way to the next billion users in crypto.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. I think this is a good place to stop. That's the nugget of the talk. Just one last thing. If people want to follow up with any of you, ask you any questions about your project or any of the thoughts that you shared, where's the best place to follow you? Maybe we go clockwise again.
Yeah, so you can follow LabDAO. We have a Twitter. It's lab_DAO, DAO. And there's also a link to our Discord on the LabDAO Twitter profile page. So you can hop in there. We'd love to see you. Mike, I think you're on mute.
We're on Twitter at Rebel.Fun, just spelled out Rebel, DOTFUN, to follow updates on what we're up to.
Yeah, so we're Lens Protocol on Lens and Twitter, and I'm Dabbit3 on Twitter, and I'm Nader.Lens on Lens.
Awesome. I will get the rest of those links out here, but thank you all very much for joining. Have a good rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, and thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.